With a hail of bullets, an array of supernatural abilities, and towering boss enemies, it's hard not to get swept up in the fervor of a promising new looter shooter. Hey there friends, it's Livid here, and welcome back to Legacy Gaming. Today our team is bringing you a special look at Nexon's upcoming game, The First Descendant, and sharing our brutally honest impressions after a combined 50 hours of testing during a special preview event. The First Descendant is a fast-paced, free-to-play looter shooter coming at us from the Korean developer Nexon. The game is just now launching its first beta on October 20th, but our channel, like many others, were given access a bit early so we could really put the title through its paces. And let me tell you, we did our due diligence. Not only were Codiak and I playing and collecting footage, but we brought in some backup and even played with some other content creators to help us fill in the gaps, as we really aim to put the game's group content to the test. However, before we get into all of that, we need to take it way back to the beginning of our experience with The First Descendant. When you fire up the game, your first task will be to pick which of the 3 starting characters you want to play. Your first option is Lapik, a more traditional soldier-esque character equipped with a bionic arm that allows him to shoot out exploding projectiles. The second option, Viessa, is all about her ice abilities. She's a pure damage dealer with a number of icy moves in her toolkit. Finally, we have Ajax, the tankiest of our starters and the most defensive character in the game at this point. Ajax is capable of throwing down a number of different shields that become big game changers in cooperative play. If you'd like to go more in depth with these characters, we do have a video covering that as well. Now, one thing that you don't have to worry about are the stats. Now, each of these 3 starting characters are balanced the exact same way, on paper, even though they have drastically different playstyles. I also want to mention that your character doesn't determine what weapons you can use. Every character can use every weapon, so that's one less thing that you need to think about when making this choice. Now ultimately, you'll be able to unlock all of the characters in the game, but that'll require some serious farming, as we'll touch on that in just a bit. I think Nexon really sets things up nicely here. You get 3 interesting characters with diverse movesets as your main choices, and to be completely honest, they're all pretty good. At this point in our experience, the excitement was building, but we still had a long way to go to determine if the game was in a good shape. With our characters selected, it was time to start the absolute grind that is the First Descendant leveling process, which is, for a lack of a better term, atrocious. Now look, we'll talk about the actual gameplay soon, but the truth is Nexon really underdeveloped the leveling experience because as it currently stands, you'll move from one mission to the next, doing the exact same thing on repeat, zone after zone. Every mission pulled from the same 3 or 4 tropes, and the devs simply replicated those from one mission to the next. Go to X location, kill waves of enemies as they spawn, defend some random beacon or box, and interact with the one item in an otherwise entirely empty world. It's the blandest of bland, on par with New World's original leveling experience, which pulls from the same playbook. Bottom line, the questing is bad. And considering that we all experienced the game with a 2x XP multiplier enabled, I have no doubt that many players won't reach the endgame before burning out unless they make some drastic changes. The real compound issue here is that leveling isn't a one and done process. There is a system in game that requires you to reset your character back to level 1 in order to get arch crystals. Now these are used for rune socketing, something vital to character progression. Bottom line, you'll be running through the leveling experience a lot, and that's not good considering how monotonous it really is. The saving grace here was the gunplay itself, which I will happily admit is good. The mechanics of moving around the world and firing your weapon and abilities is fun and satisfying. And let's be clear, that's a big deal in looter shooters, because if Nexon got that aspect of the game wrong, you better believe people will be bailing before they ever reach any sort of endgame. Now what works well is the game's faster pacing. It's a bit more arcadey when it comes to the movement, but that actually works well with the content. Anything slower or heavier just wouldn't fit the nature of the game. We were shocked to find, however, that certain things like crouching, hiding behind cover, and ledge grabbing just aren't a part of the game. It's 2022, and for these basic systems not to be part of the game, it's a bit of a letdown. However, the gameplay is still strong enough that those issues aren't the end-all be-all, but we definitely like to see them added. There's quite a few times that I found myself getting shot at that I'd wish, oh man, if I could just crouch a half an inch here, I'd be safe. But I couldn't. Now your character skills are the real shining star here. They're interesting, impactful, and for the most part, really satisfying to use. Every character does have one really strong ability that is kind of like an ultimate, but not really. So the lack of a true ultimate does leave a little to be desired, especially for a PvE-only game. But at the end of the day, it's one of the highlights of the First Descendant. I think I could speak for our whole squad when I say it's genuinely fun to play around with your kit, experiment with your abilities, and learn how to weave them into the gunplay. Now what's sorely lacking is any sort of evolution to these skills. Even at level 40, the cap during our preview period, there's seemingly nothing that changes the nature of your abilities. And that's something I think the team should seriously explore further, especially considering the fact the game's rune system is so expansive. There's a lot of room for added depth, and it would only enhance one of the best aspects of the game. If you want a detailed look at how the runes function in-game, consider checking out our Ultimate Rune Guide. As it stands right now, a grenade ability will always just be a grenade ability, and while it's fun to use, it becomes repetitive, and there's certainly more that could be done to create a sense of uniqueness. On the flip side of the gameplay experience are the guns. First, let me say, they feel great. Shooting each weapon is an enjoyable part of the combat, top to bottom. Assault rifles feel distinctly different than scout rifles, which feel different than beam weapons, so on and so forth. The issue here is that for all the cool looking weapons and icons, there's no real differentiators within a specific type of weapon. Machine guns all feel nearly the same. So much so that most of the creators we talked to, including ourselves, completely stopped caring about all the cool weapons we had in our inventories because deep down, we knew they would all function exactly the same as something we had experienced before. I even spent the time to go through every weapon we had access to, confirming this lack of variety. Now, you'll be happy to know that we did dig a little deeper and we picked the developers' brains on this topic to confirm if this is how weapons are going to be upon full release. Their answer? It turns out there will be a third tier of weapon in the yellow legendary rarity that will feature perks, unique effects depending on the weapon. Depending on the perk, the weapons will have a special usage and play a critical role as an essential gimmick for fighting Colossus. Now these perks can be further developed through enhancement, with the required materials being obtained by dismantling certain weapons. Now this should hopefully add meaningful choice to endgame weapons. So, as it stands right now, shooting the weapons, lots of fun. But until we get a taste of those higher tier weapons, that fun will likely wear off quickly, especially considering the beta will still be limited to epic tier weapons and gear. Just know more is coming, so keep an eye out here for news on that. Now, a minute or so ago, I mentioned the rune system, and it's important that we spend some time talking about this because it's one of the most expansive systems in the game. This is very much a system inspired by the likes of Warframe, which the First Descendant is destined to be compared to, as unlocking and using Descendants is pretty much on par with how Warframe handles their frames. The system itself is a bit overwhelming at first, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes really a key aspect of your progression, especially once you push towards endgame content. Runes come in a number of different flavors: Storm runes, Torrent runes, Wave runes, Thunder runes, Haze runes, and Descendant runes. As you play the game, you'll pick up a healthy amount of these. Each rune is directly tied to enhancements within a certain weapon type. For example, Torrent runes will enhance your machine guns, tactical rifles, and beam rifles. That means anything you slot in as a Torrent rune will only augment the stats of those weapons. Now the runes themselves are rather vanilla. Most of the basic tier offerings enhance a single stat like attack or critical hit chance. Things get a bit more interesting in epic tier with the hybrid runes that enhance one stat while slightly reducing another stat. It makes for some decent management as you start to lean into a specific style of play. It becomes an essential part of your pre-game ritual ahead of Void Intercept battles, the available endgame content. Now Descendant runes are the odd option out, as their enhancements are more about your character. Now these runes can increase resistances, affect the raw power of your skills, and provide you with a number of flat stat bonuses. Again, nothing that exciting, but nonetheless important. Now there are a few other options tied to this system as well, such as enhancing runes, increasing their power, as well as combining runes to create new runes. You can even change up the rune symbol on a slot to pair with the rune placed on it, directly cutting its overall cost in half. Now like I said before, it's the most expansive system in the game, albeit not super deep. Now this is where I think the team can explore further if they want to drive more meaningful change to the way a character plays. Right now, runes are largely flat stat boosts, which is a boring and antiquated way of progressing your character. I can't lay into that enough. I think everyone would be much more interested in a system that allows you to slot runes that actually change the way you play, allowing for more customization that fits the need of the challenge I'm preparing for. Now with the current system, You spend a lot of time doing the math to figure out how to eke out just a few more percentage points of gains or avoid a certain element of damage type. And that's just not something a vast majority of players are going to want to spend time doing over and over again. Couple that with the fact that there is no loadout system for these runes that carry over across all your unlocked characters, so you can't even save a build if you want to swap over. That's not good. Now, runes, while not perfect, already play a massive role in the game, especially when you consider that the game's group content, Void Intercept battles, are incredibly promising. Once you queue up, your team of 4 will be teleported into the Void, where you'll take on a Colossus, a massive boss with weak points and a number of raid-style mechanics. I can't say this system is entirely new or super unique, but it is damn fun. And even though we were playing as a 3-stack, we had a great time trying to take down these larger-than-life enemies. My only real critique with this part of the game is the fact that the scaling is just not right. At max level, with a fine selection of weapons and runes, we were still struggling to take on anything around our level. Bump that up even more to a Colossus above our level, and forget it. It's entirely possible that we were missing some key rune or system in taking these harder enemies down, but it was certainly not obvious if it was there. Now, this system could be great for the game, and I hope the team realizes that. There are some kinks to work out for sure, but Void Intercept battles are already in a great shape, and if the team can find a way to expand and perfect this part of the game, I think players will come to enjoy this aspect of the First Descendant and find it to be a key reason for sticking around. Now, what's shocking is that outside of Void Intercept battles, the world is seemingly empty. Sure, the First Descendant is built in Unreal Engine 5, and things look gorgeous, but pretty games just aren't enough anymore. While leveling and exploring the world, it's impossible to actually care about any of it because it's all so bland. The 3 zones we got to explore, Kingston, the Albany Mountains, and the Red Desert, were devoid of nearly everything that makes up a great game world. Roaming enemies don't really exist. NPCs are non-existent minus 1 or 2 at the start of a zone, and buildings are devoid of all character, and rarely do they factor into the gameplay. Sadly, there's just nothing unique or special about each part of the world that helps it stand out aside from the palette swap. If you tie this back into our discussion about the questing, you can start to understand why it was such a boring experience. The only splash of color in an otherwise bland experience was the grappling hook that every character gets. It allows you to explore the world both horizontally and vertically, which is nice. But sadly, it isn't a physics or momentum-based tether like Spider-Man's web slinging or Pathfinder in Apex. Instead of a buttery smooth grapple that launches you smoothly around objects and carries momentum, it instead sends you directly to your target, then shoots you upward, killing all momentum entirely, and making it impossible to weave into combat. Now, if we go back to the fact that the game again doesn't have any sort of ledge grapple mechanic, you can really begin to see how clunky the grapple actually is. Now, this could be a great aspect of the game if reworked to focus purely on smooth, blended traversal. It's not bad right now, it's just not as good as it could potentially be. Now, I want to be fair here to the developers, and I do need to caveat all this with the fact that we were only playing with a somewhat small group of content creators. Because of that, there weren't nearly as many people to start up missions around you as you are roaming around, which could explain the lack of intended enemy density. But that's not a good thing for a game to rely on. At the end of the day, the Ingress continent is just not that interesting. And that's a big problem if Nexon hopes to make this game stand out in the genre, when something like Warframe and Destiny just offers so much more. What's also not going to help is the game's story, which isn't laid out in a way that makes it that interesting. You get a few cutscenes early on that present you to the big bad, but throughout our entire leveling experience, those story moments just never truly landed. Again, we only got to explore 3 zones, so we didn't get the full scope of the game, but like I said before, you meet maybe 1 or 2 NPCs out in the world, and there's nothing about them that helps you connect to the story of the First Descendant. All I can really say is that a relic called the Heart of Iron is really important to the bad guy. Why? Something world-ending destruction. But we generally have a hard time caring when all we're doing is the same 3 mission archetypes over and over again. It's important to realize that all of these shortcomings connect to the overall experience in the game. The First Descendant is a PvE-only title, which means story and systems are vital to making the game unique. Sure, you could say that the endgame is all that matters, and while that may be true for some people, if the experience and systems leading up to the endgame are flawed, I doubt one aspect of the endgame will save this early stages of a potentially promising boat from sinking. Now, we've said countless times that the journey is just as important as the destination when it comes to anything for a rewarding experience. I'm not saying the game is destined to fail, but I think you'll find that once the vast majority of players have access to the beta, a lot of what I'm saying is going to be echoed across the community. When you step back, you do have to realize one thing. The First Descendant is going to be a free-to-play title, which means you lose absolutely nothing by checking out for yourself. And honestly, I recommend you do that. Betas are meant to give players the chance to test the game and provide feedback to the developers. And since the First Descendant doesn't have a concrete release date, it's a good opportunity to let the team know what can be improved upon. I also don't want to ignore that the game has a premium currency, just like Warframe. And here it allows you to basically unlock base Descendants quickly and get the resource needed for rune socketing quickly as well. Now, will it immediately turn some players off? For sure. But it's pretty on par with Warframe, so I'm gonna let it slide. While I'd like to say that I enjoyed every minute within the game, that's simply not the case. I definitely had a blast with the Colossus fights and exploring some character builds, but it's a luster that didn't last long with such limited options at our disposal. Other systems like character abilities and the gunplay mechanics are good, but there's just too much weighing down the experience that feeds into those things. A boring questing system, an uninspiring world, and cool-looking weapons that don't end up feeling unique, there's just too many systems that don't reach their full potential. We haven't seen all the game has to offer, but what's on the table right now definitely doesn't fill our appetite that this genre is capable of delivering, and it's important to be honest and convey that as absolute fans of the looter-shooter genre. Now, while this isn't a worth-your-time review, and primarily a first impressions of a game still not released, I am confident in our assessment that the game in its current state will struggle to resonate with the voracious looter-shooter community. First Descendant has a long road ahead of it if it hopes to stand out in the genre, and we genuinely hope the developers take these criticisms to heart. So there you have it, our honest take on Nexon's upcoming game, The First Descendant. If you found this video helpful, do me a solid and hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. We do have a whole host of videos leading up to the beta launch that will help you get a deeper look at everything. Weapons, characters, bosses, you name it. Now, the only way that we can continue to bring you content like this is if developers see that our videos resonate with you all. So if you're feeling up to it, help us out. Now, I also want to let you know that our 2022 Leave a Legacy charity event is set for Saturday, October 22nd. For a second year in a row, we've partnered with Connecticut Children's to help bring the joy of video games to kids at the hospital. Now mark your calendars and be sure to join our charity stream as we raise money for kids at the hospital and give away hundreds of dollars in free games, prizes, and more. My name is Livid, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.